Science is not just about knowing things and discovering things. It's about who gets to define reality. Centuries ago, if your discovery challenged the divine rights of the king or God's creation, well, you weren't just wrong, you were a threat. History have shown us many examples of scientists being silenced by political institutions because their discoveries were going against the principles of the said political institutions. Take, for example, Galileo being silenced and restrained at home for his discoveries in solar system, or, for example, Charles Darwin. When he published The Origin of Species, he didn't just present a biological theory explaining that species evolved through a consensus of natural selection. He went directly against the clergy's monopoly on the origins of humanity. Here, history shows us one thing. Political institutions don't fear science. They fear the loss of control that science brings. As history has shown, political institutions are a major interfering actor with the veracity and universality of science. And thus we should wonder, how far do political institutions interfere with the universality of science? We are going to see a few modern-day examples on how political institutions might have interfered and interacted with science in hot topics. And then we are going to see how political institutions can apply a truth filter to science and thus change the way it is perceived by the public or the way that discoveries can change the way of things. First, let's look at climate change. For years, scientists have been providing data showing that the crisis is emergent and is nowadays very present. And yet, in this case, political institutions have been, well, that is to say, silent. The science here is universal. A molecule of carbon acts the same whether it is in Boston, in Moscow, or in Paris. But politics is very local concerning climate change, and most of all, considered as a short-term problem to resolve. For the last 40 years, political institutions have used media as a distortion lens. By framing the climate action as an ideology or a political opinion, they have successfully broke the universality of the threat. If the public thinks that the danger is still out of sight, then the institutions don't have to change the system or the economy. Another major problem here is that this under-the-carpet strategy mainly relies on personal beliefs of the decisionary actors. Yet, this is not a question where politics should be allowed to be unneutral. Here, more than distorting the truth and taking action relatively to the data provided by science, political institutions deliberately modify the alarming aspect of the climate change crisis and thus the public reaction to it. Politics create a bias and thus damage the neutrality and universality of science. Now let's turn to a second case study. If climate change was about denying science, COVID-19 is about kidnapping it. During the pandemic, politics began to hide behind the phrase "we are following science" to justify any decision, lockdown, or any different public advice. But science is not a holy book. It is a messy process, always in evolution, and mainly relying on failure. When the data changed, as it's supposed to, the public didn't see progress, they saw lies, and political institutions weaponized scientific uncertainty to deflect responsibility. Add this to vaccine nationalism, where scientific data became state secrets and diplomatic tools. There, the virus, the pandemic, was treated as a geopolitical tool and not as a biological crisis. Therefore, we lost the very essence of science universality. But sometimes the interference is even more direct. It's one thing to ignore a report. It's another thing to delete the vocabulary used to write it. In the United States, the Trump administration pioneered a form of scientific erasure. This went beyond simple disagreement. They directed agencies like the CDC or the EPA to delete the words climate change or diversity from official documents. When you close climate-related research institutes or remove women's health topics from public websites, You aren't just shaping policy, you are erasing the truth and thus forbidding science to exist. If a scientist cannot use the word climate in a paper about climate, then the research stops existing. This is the institutional forbidden zone, a place where facts are redacted before they can be debated. And this exists in many other totalitarian regimes. Totalitarianism, or like totalitarianism behaviors in institutions, is a break to the progress of science, to its sharing to the public, and thus to its universality. So, if political institutions inherently distort science for their own survival, where does that leave us? This brings us to an open, uncomfortable question. Should we opt for technocracy? On the one hand, we have a technocracy, ruled by experts, promises decisions based on data, not polls. Imagine a world where long-term survival of the planet beats the short-term goal of the next election. But on the other hand, science can tell us how to build a vaccine, but it can't tell us who will be allowed to get it first. Science provides the facts, but politics, ideally, provide the values associated to the facts. Can we bridge that gap, or are we destined to filter the truth until it fits the shape of the power that we want to keep? The data is in, the choice is ours. The question, in my opinion, stays open. I, personally, wouldn't say that the technocracy is the final solution because, as I said previously, the humanity would lack in such a system. Yet, we should imagine a system where scientists are allowed to take more space, especially in the mediatization of their own work.